Welcome to Chennai, South India, where it is not cold. This is Nick at Stridewise.com, where we like to look at long-lasting footwear, and I have come to the city formerly known as Madras to investigate India's very first Goodyear Welted shoe brand. That's a way of making shoes that are very durable, water-resistant, and resolable. But even though this factory has over 30 years of history, the way they go about making Goodyear welts here is unlike anything I've ever seen before. The resident shoemaker Afan is going to show you exactly what we mean. You're going to be surprised.
Nick, welcome to Bridlen.
Thanks. Vinakam.
Vinakam it is. Okay.
Vinakam Nandri. Now the first step in the creation of a shoe is also, fortunately, probably the first question people are going to be asking about Bridlen. What kind of leather do you use? There's some places in India, like Kanpur, that has a bit of reputation for so-so quality leather. Here, as you've shown me, you have the same leathers that like the world's greatest shoe and boot brands are using. You've got Shinki cordovan from Japan, you've got CF Stead from England, you've got Weinheimer, the box calf, and this is all stuff used in really high-end shoes. Walk us through, which suede have you got here?
I've got the Janus Calf to show you, which is my favorite.
That's sort of considered the best suede from the best suede place. Like Janus Calf that's like the creme de la creme of shoe uppers.
That's the idea, Nick, is that we have the possibility to go out to the best tanneries in the world. So you know the speciality about the Charles F. Stead's Janus Calf is that they've got grain on one side and suede on the other. You can see how buttery this is.
Yeah.
You can sort of write your hand. It's called the writing effect on the suede. It also makes for a very comfortable shoe, I must say, because my boots today are unlined. So the grain side touches against my skin or the sock, and the suede side is up. It makes for a very comfortable shoe.
Now I've seen Stead leathers and Shinki leathers, of course, and Weinheimer leathers. I've seen these being stocked at factories I've visited in Europe and in the US. Are there challenges getting these foreign leathers into India?
Challenges not so much as getting them in the quantities that the tanneries want to sell them. So fortunately, the brand demands that much of leather. So we bring them out once or twice a year. But yeah, not really challenges, I would say. We are able to meet the quantities that they ask.
Now when it comes to shell cordovan, one of the most compelling, some say the best dressy leather, some say the most hard-wearing leather in the whole world, some say it's not even leather, but that aside, there's a lot of places to get cordovan from. You go with Japan's Shinki hikaku. Why is that?
To pay respect also to our origins, the brand started off in Japan. Why do we use Shinki over other brands? We simply think it's the best. There are obviously more popular brands out there, but staying true to our origins of where we source our leathers from, we try to get the best of everything. So if it's the box calf, it's Weinheimer. If it's the suedes, it's Charles F. Stead. So if it's the cordovan, it's Shinki.
Let's see the leather getting cut up downstairs.
Yep.
It's nice you got fans in this room where people are working. This is nicer than the leather storage room, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
This is, you call this a clicking, where the leather pieces get cut out for different parts of the shoe.
Obviously, we want to try to make the most of the leather that we have. It's also a sustainable way of thinking around, so you don't waste as much leather, but that's nowhere near the top 3 priorities of why a leather is getting cut in the way it's getting cut. The first one would be direction. The animal has a direction of stretch, which we want to keep in mind because we flex the leather at the vamp in a certain direction, only goes in one direction. So we want to try to keep along with that direction. Second thing is we want to avoid open defects. Things like nicks and cuts, wane marks, what you call growth marks. We want to try and avoid these things. And the third or even the fourth one would be what you're talking about, which is trying to make the most of the leather. And once you do that, it's not just cutting it out there. We're looking further to see if there are defects that we can find on the inside of the shoe. Because we don't want to waste this leather once it goes into the lasting process where the leather is stretched and certain defects that you can't quite see on the top gets exposed later.
So the craftspeople need to not just be able to see where there are defects now, they need to be able to foresee where there might be defects later.
That's correct. And she's quite experienced to understand that where would the maximum defects be? It'd probably be around the side of the animal, perhaps it's grazing against a barbed wire or something like that. So she tried to look closer to those parts of the hide.
It's like balancing aesthetics and also the sustainability side. You don't want to throw out leather unless you have to.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to go to the closing. All right.
Yep.
Let's go to there.
All right. So Nick, I want to talk to you about what we call 3D attachment, right?
Yeah, because this is like one of the more unusual things about Bridlen's shoemaking. Every other factory that I've been to where they make shoes, they'll cut the leather like we've seen, they'll stitch it together, and then it'll get pulled over the last either by hand or with a machine. But that's not the way you do it at Bridlen, and I haven't seen this done before.
Well, it's going to get attached first on the last, as you can see, and then immediately taking to a sewing machine to sew it down. Now the reason he's doing it on the last is, on a last there are different dimensions, what we call a positive dimension and a negative dimension. Positive dimension here, then it kind of dips inside and then comes out again. So So it's two different dimensions on the same side. Now you see when he's going around the corner of the upper, the dimension changes. When that's done, the upper takes the shape of the last itself. But if you were to do this process on a flat surface, you would only get one dimension. But by doing it on a 3D model, you're introducing that shape early on to the upper itself.
And the primary reason you do it this way is that traditional lasting, there's a lot of pulling and stretching the leather over the last. This doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't require you to do that because we're bringing almost, partial shape to the upper even before the lasting process starts. Leather only has a certain amount of stretch, but then in the lasting process, sometimes we put excessive amount of stretch. We're avoiding that. This also helps to keep the originality of the leather, the touch of the leather as it was meant to be, intact.
With hand lasting, it's easier to have the leather conform to every shape of the last. Like you can last more delicately, get a bit more shape when it's done by hand. And that seems to be a similar theme here. You said you believe you get even more control over the leather.
That's correct. The other thing that's kind of unique here is that between the upper and the lining, we don't use any interlining materials.
Right, you've got glue between the upper and the lining, right?
No, we don't use any glue at all. This is similar to what you call fused lining jackets versus floating canvas jackets. In floating canvas jackets, you've got a material that is separate from the top to what's behind it. It's floating on its own. This allows for better breathability of the leather as well.
I remember I made a pair of boots once and I must have used like a quart of glue in it. When a shoe has lining, there's so much more glue involved than you would think. You really don't have any in your shoes.
No, only to keep it together along the edges until it gets sewn. In between that, there's no gluing process as well.
That's rare, very rare.
Well, because if you use glue like you explained earlier, it just makes the leather hard. And it does not allow for the main property of leather, which is breathability.
Right.
Because you have all that glue between the upper and the lining. There's no point having to use leather upper and leather lining if you're just going to glue the whole thing in between.
That's always in the discussion of like lined versus unlined boots. Lining, some people find it more comfortable, but because you're putting in another layer of leather there, it affects breathability to an extent. You're saying a lot of that effect is because of how much glue is used in the lining process.
Absolutely. If you're going to be using full grain aniline leather, which means there's not as much chemicals in the leather itself, the leather is going to be breathable. If you're using drum dyed leather for the lining, it's going to be breathable on its own. Now, in between these two breathable layers of leather, we don't want any glue that makes it less breathable. Yeah. So we avoid that.
I didn't think that was even possible.
The 3D attachment process helps that as well.
Okay. Now there are a few interesting things happening underfoot in your shoes as well, right? Like on the surface, very classic traditional construction. It's like leather insole, leather outsole, you got the cork filling. But for one, your insole here, this is 5mm vegetable tanned leather. Veg tan leather insoles, people like them because they're really nice and hard and sturdy and stable underfoot. I don't understand how this is vegetable tanned and 5mm and yet it's so flexible.
But we want it to be sturdy, we want it to be thick so it can take the impression of your foot, but you don't want it to be hard, you want it to be as flexible as possible. And the way we do that is this Italian tannery has a natural ingredient that they add into the tanning process that makes it's possible to do this.
I'm keen to investigate the welting in a minute, but while we're talking about the outsoles, you also, that's my sweat. Everything I touch gets sweat all over it. And this brand, JFJ Baker, the #1 brand for oak bark tanned leather outsoles.
100% oak bark tanned as well.
Right.
Which is very rare.
There's an emphasis here. A lot of people will say soles like this are the best leather soles you can get for a shoe. Maybe just the best soles, period. What's the big deal?
The way they make it takes them anywhere between 12 to 18 months to finish the tanning process. It's because it goes into different pits. It's almost like cold teas.
Pit tanning, yeah.
And you can imagine if it's warm tea, it takes the flavor much sooner. But if it's cold tea, it takes it much slower. But the advantage of doing that is that it keeps the fibers intact in its original format. Simply the fact that it takes this long to make is a skill.
Yeah, it's a skillful art form as well.
It is. One of the main reasons we work with them as well.
This is an extremely unusual thing about Bridlen's shoes. These shoes are Goodyear welted with a Goodyear welt machine, but they don't have the canvas rib. A lot of people will prefer hand welted footwear because it doesn't have the canvas rib, and there's a good argument to be made that makes it more durable because you're not relying on this glue here from not separating, right? When it's hand welted, generally you're cutting a channel into the insole to stitch to. And normally it's one or the other. But what Bridlen's doing here is they're doing Goodyear welted with the machine, but they're replacing the typical canvas rib with the channeled insole here. So it's sort of I won't say best of both worlds, but it's like a combination of hand welting and Goodyear welting. Like you're getting a lot of the benefits of hand welting, but with the the speed and the lower price of a Goodyear welt.
That's it. And then the flexibility and the break-in period is significantly reduced because all the materials are now parallelly stacked rather than one rib that is perpendicular to the rest of the material.
That's so interesting. Let's see how it's done.
What we want is the material to be compact yet soft. So this is something that will be done by hand with a bespoke maker, but we do this with a machine. We've taken a carving on a thick insole to which now the welt and the upper would be stitched. Very different from this where the rib is attached with glue onto an insole. This is where the channel is further opened out.
Alright, the channel that we saw getting cut into before gets further grooved in.
He's opening it out for better ease when he does the welting.
Nandri. No one ever likes it when I say Nandri.
It's the accent, I don't think you've got it.
I don't have an accent.
No,
I speak Tamil perfectly.
So here's where the welt is getting stitched onto the channeled insole.
This is a big deal.
Yep, this is the big step.
Oh my god. This is the hand welt Goodyear welt.
That's it. You got consistency of a machine, but the benefit of the hand welted, where the rib is sleeping and not standing.
What did I just witness? What did I witness?
The change.
This is insane.
The change of the shoemaking industry. There you have it.
I can't process this.
And now this would get hammered down, so the whole thing is sleeping, and then the welt becomes flat. I'll show you that process.
If you say so.
I'll show you that. Once the welting is completed, these bits will get hammered down, and you have a leather shank with a metal piece.
It's a leather shank with steel shank on it.
Steel shank on it. Correct.
It's gotta make everything extra.
Correct. Well, makes it all the more sturdy, as you can see.
I know, this is like, it's like the same way you combine a Goodyear welt and a hand welt, you combine a steel shank and a leather shank.
The best of both worlds.
That's so funny.
And once that's done, you fill the whole thing with cork.
Yeah.
And then we've got the outsoling process, which we will show you now.
Black leather, huh?
Yep. Weinheimer's. So in this case, it's an open groove shoe. So he's just taking the groove out on the shoe. And the next step would be that he'd stitch the outsole inside the groove. That's it.
Beautiful. Nandri. All right, how do you pronounce it? What am I getting wrong?
Nandri.
That's what I said.
No, Nandri. Dri.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, it's Nandri.
Nandri.
That's it.
That's what I was saying?
No. So the reason he adds water here is to reduce the temperature, because at that speed, you can
Heats
burn
up the leather
leather
a lot. Yeah.
So you add water every step. You've got two sets of cutters here. You hear two different sounds. One's the round cutter and the other one's a 2B cutter. It's called a double lip.
Right, you're not just smoothing down the outside of the sole, you're cutting it like a little tube.
Yeah, two little tubes. It gives that aesthetic.
It is aesthetic, I'll tell you what, I like
I
it.
tell you what, it looks nice.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because leather is not always consistent. You can have the second pair that comes slightly thinner or slightly thicker.
Yeah.
If that's the case, you might have to change the cutter. So every time you've got to swap it out. So it's not productive to have to do this, but we do it anyway.
It's a really nice little touch.
Yeah. Just the finer details.
Nandri.
You got it now, man.
Nice corded sole.
Yeah, it's a
This
rock
is a
hard
real
sole.
boot guy boot. You got a Dr. Sole, corded sole.
Well, I had to make this for one of the competitions, the Patina Thunderdome, because I could not submit one of our shoes.
I know, your website's really funny because it's all like dressy shoes, some dressy boots, and then you have this, the ultimate casual boot, the boondocker.
Only two boots that were both entries for the Thunderdome.
You just made it for stitch down.
That's it.
I love Ben. Ben has far-reaching fingers, I'll tell you that. I should do a video on this Patina Thunderdome one day. Bridlen.com is my current favorite place for these sorts of shoes. They also do a lot of like dressy shoes as well on the area of stuff you will very much wear in business professional and more formal settings. But for business casual, they don't slouch either. And I'm gonna pick myself up some some dirty bucks, I think. Try those out. Thanks for your time. Subscribe to this channel and go to bridlen.com. There it is. There's that website. There it is. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much.